There's a character in the middle of a fight he's clearly losing who gets offered the one thing almost every human being has secretly wished for at some point: the chance to live forever, to become something more than human, to never have to die at all. He refuses, bleeding, outmatched, moments from death. He refuses without a second of hesitation and dies shortly after, at peace, with a smile on his face, having accomplished exactly what he set out to do. His name is Kyojuro Rengoku, and today you're going to find out what he understood about living with purpose that you, with a life far less threatened than his was in that moment, still haven't figured out. Think about how many people spend their entire lives chasing some version of what Akaza offers here: more time, more security, more certainty before they're willing to actually start living the way they want to. Rengoku gets that offer explicitly, literally, in the middle of the one moment where accepting it would make the most obvious sense. And he still says no. There's a reason this specific scene lands as hard as it does. It's not just a fight scene with a tempting offer attached to it. It's the entire premise most of us secretly organize our lives around, that if we just had more time, more resources, more certainty, we'd finally be free to live the way we actually want to. Being tested directly in front of the one character in this story who spent his whole life proving that premise wrong before Akaza ever showed up to offer it to him. Rengoku's mother taught him something when he was young that would end up shaping the entire rest of his life: that being born with strength comes with a responsibility attached to it, a duty to use that strength in service of people who don't have it, rather than simply for your own benefit. She died while he was still young. And most children, losing a parent that early, might let a lesson like that fade along with the memory of who taught it to them. Rengoku doesn't. He holds on to it, deliberately, as if letting it go would mean losing her all over again. Hold on to that detail because everything about the man he becomes traces directly back to this one teaching, held on to through everything that follows. There's something worth noticing about the specific shape of what she gave him. It isn't a rule about winning, or being the strongest, or achieving anything measurable. It's a responsibility in orientation toward other people, built directly into the definition of what strength is even for. Most people, especially in a story full of warriors chasing power for its own sake, would define strength as something that serves the person who has it. Rengoku inherits a completely different premise from the very beginning. That strength, which doesn't serve anyone but yourself, has already missed the entire point of having it. Rengoku's father, Shinjuro, was once a flame Hashira himself, one of the strongest swordsmen in the organization, admired, respected. After his wife's death, something in him breaks that never gets repaired. He gives up his position, turns to drinking, grows distant and dismissive toward his sons, including Kyojuro, who's left to essentially raise himself and his younger brother while watching the one parent he has left slowly disappear into grief he never processes. This is worth sitting with directly. Kyojuro grows up watching, up close, exactly what happens when someone lets devastating loss consume the rest of their life. His own father is the clearest possible example of a person who never finds his way back from grief, someone who had every reason once to believe in purpose and duty and simply stop believing any of it mattered after enough was taken from him. Most people watching that example set so closely and so young would absorb the lesson their father's life was actually teaching, that devotion and purpose don't protect you from loss, so why bother holding on to them at all? Kyojuro doesn't absorb that lesson. He does something much harder. He watches his father's collapse and decides consciously to become the opposite of it. There's a specific kind of quiet heroism in this that's easy to skip past. Kyojuro doesn't get to resent his father cleanly, the way you might resent a stranger who wronged you. This is his father, the man who once embodied everything Kyojuro is trying to become, now reduced to someone who barely functions, someone Kyojuro still has to care for, still has to love, even while watching him model exactly the outcome Kyojuro is determined never to repeat. He carries both things at once: love for a broken man and an unwavering refusal to let that same brokenness become his own inheritance. There's also a younger brother in this picture, Senjuro, who looks up to Kyojuro the way Kyojuro might once have looked up to their father before the collapse. Kyojuro doesn't just have to hold himself together under this weight. He becomes, in practice, the actual parent in that household, The person Senjuro learns what strength and steadiness are supposed to look like from entirely because their actual father stopped being available to teach anyone anything. That's an enormous amount to carry for someone still young himself, and he carries it without ever once making Senjuro feel like a burden for needing it. What's remarkable about Rengoku compared to almost every other character in this kind of story is how genuinely joyful he is. He isn't gritting his teeth through duty, forcing himself into positivity as some kind of performance. He eats with enormous enthusiasm, laughs loudly, encourages the people around him constantly, throws himself into every interaction with a kind of full-hearted warmth that most people, especially most warriors in stories like this one, don't get written with. This isn't naivety. He's fully aware of how dangerous his work is, fully aware that he could die at any moment doing it. His joy isn't the absence of that awareness. It's a direct response to it. Having watched his father lose all sense of purpose after tragedy, Kyojuro seems to have decided, somewhere along the way, that living fully and joyfully in the time he does have is the actual answer to how short and dangerous that time might be. You know people who treat joy as something you're only allowed once everything's settled, once the danger's past, once life feels safe enough to enjoy without guilt. Rengoku never gets that kind of safety. He chooses the joy anyway, specifically because the danger is real, not despite it. There's a subtle but important distinction worth drawing out here. Toxic positivity, the kind that ignores real danger, that papers over legitimate fear with forced cheerfulness, isn't what Rengoku practices. He takes his responsibilities with total seriousness. He trains relentlessly, treats every mission as genuinely life-threatening, never pretends the stakes are lower than they are. The joy sits right alongside that seriousness, not instead of it. He's proof that you don't have to choose between taking something seriously and still finding real delight inside of it. Throughout the story, Kyojuro also keeps trying, in his own quiet way, to reach his father, visiting him, seeking some flicker of the man who once taught him what strength was supposed to mean, hoping for a moment of recognition or pride that mostly never comes. Shinjiro stays distant, dismissive, unable or unwilling to offer the connection Kyojuro keeps returning for, and Kyojuro keeps trying anyway, without ever letting that repeated disappointment curdle into the same bitterness that consumed his father in the first place. That's worth sitting with on its own. He doesn't need the reconciliation to arrive in order to keep living out the values it would have represented. He just keeps living them regardless of whether the person who taught them to him ever notices. The arc that defines Rengoku's story finds him assigned to investigate a series of disappearances aboard a train, a mission that puts him and the people traveling on it directly in the path of a demon capable of trapping victims inside manipulated dreams to destroy them from within. Rengoku fights to protect everyone on that train, not just the demon slayers traveling alongside him, but ordinary passengers who have no idea how close they came to death, who will likely never even learn his name. There's no glory in this for him. No audience keeping score. No guarantee any of these strangers will ever know what he did for them. He does it anyway, with the same full commitment he brings to everything else, because the people on that train matter to him regardless of whether they'll ever be in a position to thank him for it. This connects directly back to what his mother taught him, made concrete in the most literal way possible. Strength existing to protect people who don't have it isn't an abstract philosophy for Rengoku. It's a train full of sleeping strangers he's never met, whose names he'll likely never learn, who will go on with their lives with no idea how close they came to disaster or who stood between them and it. That's the real test of a principle like this. Not whether you'll live up to it when someone's watching, but whether you'll live up to it when literally no one ever will. There's a demon on that train too, working from the inside, trapping passengers and demon slayers alike inside, manipulated dreams designed to kill them without ever waking up. Rengoku fights through this threat with the same full commitment he brings to everything visible, even the invisible, unglamorous work of protecting people from a danger they don't even know is happening to them gets his complete effort, not a diminished version of it because no one's around to see the difficulty involved. After protecting the train, Rengoku is confronted directly by Akaza, one of the most powerful demons in the entire story. A being with strength far beyond what any human, even a Hashira, can match. The fight that follows pushes Rengoku past his limits in every sense, testing not just his skill, but the entire philosophy he's built his life around. Partway through, sensing Rengoku's exceptional strength, Akaza makes him an offer: become a demon. Trade his humanity for power beyond anything achievable as a human. Escape the mortality currently working against him in this exact fight. Live, potentially forever. This is the exact same offer, in different words, that broke Akaza himself once, back when he was a devastated young man named Hakuji with nothing left to lose. Muzan's whole strategy depends on finding people shattered enough to say yes. Akaza extends that same offer here, certain that no one facing death would actually refuse it. There's a specific irony worth naming in this exact pairing of characters. Akaza, 100 years earlier, lost his father, his mentor, and the woman he loved, and accepted an escape from that pain that cost him his humanity. Rengoku, standing in front of him now, lost his mother and effectively lost his father too, to grief rather than death, and builds an entirely different response out of comparable loss. The same category of devastation produced two opposite outcomes, and the difference wasn't the size of the pain, it was what each of them decided that pain was allowed to turn them into. Rengoku refuses, not out of stubbornness, not because he hasn't considered what's being offered, but because he understands something Akaza lost the ability to see 100 years earlier, that the value of a human life isn't in spite of its limits, it's built directly out of them. A life that ends is a life that has to matter now, has to be lived fully now, has to be spent doing something worth doing now, precisely because there's no unlimited later to fall back on. He tells Akaza, in the middle of a fight he knows he's losing, that growing old and eventually dying is not a tragedy to be avoided. It's the natural, dignified shape a human life is supposed to take. Power without that mortality attached to it isn't a gift in his eyes. It's the thing that turned a grieving young man into a monster who no longer remembers what he was fighting to protect in the first place. This is worth sitting with directly. Rengoku is dying, in real time, in front of the demon offering him a way out of it. And he still says no. Most of us, facing far smaller threats to our comfort or safety, take the easier escape without a second thought. Rengoku has the actual escape hatch open right in front of him, guaranteed, and closes it himself. There's something worth noting about who's making this offer. Akaza isn't a stranger to loss. He understands in his own buried way exactly what it feels like to be offered an end to unbearable pain. He's not lying about what the offer provides. He genuinely believes he's offering Rengoku a gift, the same gift that once seemed like salvation to him. Rengoku's refusal isn't a rejection of Akaza's pain or a claim that his own suffering matters less. It's a rejection of the specific idea that escaping death is what actually solves anything. A lesson Akaza himself proves true in the most tragic way possible, by having lived 100 more years and still never finding peace. Rengoku loses the fight. Akaza is simply too strong, and Rengoku, already exhausted from protecting the train beforehand, succumbs to his wounds. But he succeeds at the actual goal. Every passenger on that train survives, protected until the very end by someone who never once wavered from the purpose his mother gave him as a child. In his final moments, Rengoku isn't afraid, isn't bitter, isn't consumed by regret about the life he didn't get to live longer. He's proud. He tells the younger demon slayers around him plainly to keep moving forward, to trust in their own strength, and he dies believing completely that his life meant exactly what he wanted it to mean, that he lived up to the responsibility his mother handed him all those years ago, right up until the very last second he had to spend it. This is the payoff of everything that came before. Rengoku doesn't discover some new piece in his dying moment that he didn't have before. He simply continues being exactly who he already was, all the way through, with nothing left to reconcile, because he never left anything unresolved in the first place. There's a detail worth including here that makes this even harder to watch, and even more worth learning from. In his final words, Rengoku speaks not just to the demon slayers around him, but inwardly to his mother, affirming in his own mind that he lived up to what she asked of him all those years ago. He doesn't get an answer back. He doesn't need one. The entire point of a life built around a value like that is that it doesn't require external confirmation to feel complete. He simply knows, on his own terms, that he did what he set out to do, and that knowledge is enough to die at peace with. Most of us live as if death is something to be endlessly postponed, avoided, planned around, as if genuine purpose and joy are luxuries to indulge in only once safety is fully guaranteed. Rengoku never gets that guarantee, not for a single day of his adult life, and he builds an entire existence around meaning and joy anyway, refusing to let uncertainty about how much time he has left talk him out of living fully with the time he does have. Think about how much of your own life you've put on hold, waiting for conditions that feel safe enough to finally start living the way you actually want to. The relationship you'll pursue once you're more secure. The work you'll finally commit to once the risk feels smaller. The joy you've quietly rationed, telling yourself you'll allow more of it once circumstances improve. Rengoku's entire life argues against that kind of waiting. He never got safer circumstances. He just decided the circumstances he had were enough to build a full life inside of right now, without conditions attached. There's a specific version of this worth naming directly, because it's easy to think this lesson only applies to big, dramatic postponements, the career change, the move, the relationship. It applies just as much to the small daily version, the compliment you didn't give because the moment felt slightly awkward, the phone call you didn't make because you told yourself you'd do it when things calm down, the ordinary Tuesday you let pass without really being present for it because you were mentally somewhere else, waiting for a more important day to actually show up and live in. Rengoku's version of urgency wasn't reserved for the big moments. It ran underneath all of it, all the time, in ordinary days that could have just as easily been the day everything ended. Ask yourself honestly, if you knew, the way Rengoku effectively knew, that your time might be far shorter than you're assuming, would the way you're currently living still make sense to you? Or are you quietly waiting for a guarantee of safety that was never actually coming? Rengoku isn't at peace with dying because death didn't scare him, or because his life was somehow easier than yours. He grew up watching his own father collapse under grief, spent his whole life doing work that could kill him on any given day, and still chose, deliberately, over and over, to live with full joy and full purpose anyway. His peace wasn't the absence of difficulty. It was built directly inside of it. You don't have to solve your entire life today. You don't have to suddenly live with total fearlessness or purpose just because you watched a video on YouTube. But maybe you can start by asking yourself, honestly, what you've been postponing until conditions feel safer, and whether Rengoku's example suggests that the safety you're waiting for was never actually the thing standing between you and living fully in the first place. There's one last thing worth carrying out of this, because it's easy to walk away thinking Rengoku's story is really about death, about facing it bravely, about being unafraid when the moment finally comes. It isn't, not really. It's a story about everything that happened before that moment. Years of choosing purpose over despair, joy over bitterness, presence over withdrawal, long before dying was ever on the table. The peace he has at the end isn't something that appears out of nowhere in his final breath. It's the simple, unglamorous result of a life spent consistently choosing the same things over and over until there was nothing left unresolved to be afraid of. If there's a single takeaway worth holding on to, it might be this: nobody gets to choose the moment their story ends. Rengoku didn't get to choose his either. It came earlier than anyone around him would have wanted. In the middle of a fight, most people wouldn't have expected him to have to face it all. What he did get to choose, every single day leading up to it, was what kind of person would be standing there when it finally happened. That choice was available to him the entire time, in every ordinary day that came before the extraordinary one. It's available to you too right now, regardless of how much time turns out to be left.